Welcome to Credit and Coffee. Today, I'm sharing a deeply personal account of facing a midlife layoff, the courage it took to pursue a different path, and the surprising ways it changed how some friends saw me. The chill in the air had started to bite a little harder that morning, a sharp reminder that the warmth of summer had truly passed, much like, I would soon discover, the perceived stability of my life. I remember the faint hum of the server racks from my home office, a sound that had become so utterly mundane, a backdrop to the endless lines of code that filled my days for nearly 2 decades, coding that built systems and solved complex problems for a large tech company, coding that brought a substantial income, enough to navigate the investments, the stock market fluctuations, and the seemingly comfortable life we had built. My morning routine was a ritual of quiet efficiency, the precise measure of coffee grounds, the low gurgle of the machine, the subtle scent of brewing coffee mingling with the faint metallic tang of old wiring in the house. I'd sit at the kitchen island, a smooth, cool granite surface, tracing its imperfections with my thumb as I scrolled through news feeds, always an eye on the markets, on the latest Bitcoin trends, on the ever-shifting landscape of cryptocurrencies that had once, years ago, lured me into a risky investment that taught me a harsh lesson about volatility and the importance of solid risk management, a lesson I thought I'd fully absorbed, tucking it away as a cautionary tale from my younger, bolder days. The memory of that sharp financial sting, the cold dread as the numbers plummeted, still pricked at the edges of my consciousness, a subtle phantom limb of regret. The house itself felt big around me, echoing with a quiet anxiety I often tried to ignore, a nagging feeling of being house poor despite the impressive mortgage payments we'd been diligently making, payments that had recently started to feel heavier, almost crushing, as interest rates began their slow, relentless climb. There was the constant worry about the inevitable roof repair, the furnace that made a strange rattling sound every winter, the little cracks in the foundation that I'd tell myself were nothing, just settling, but which gnawed at me in the quiet hours. Our initial financial planning had seemed so robust, built on a steady income and optimistic projections of continued career progression, of a future where passive income streams would supplement our earnings. But the reality of rising utility bills, the constant anxiety over soaring inflation, and the ever-increasing cost of living had begun to erode the edges of our comfort, turning what was once a source of pride into a gilded cage. I remembered the glossy brochures from the bank, detailing how our investments would grow, how our pension plan would secure our retirement, a future meticulously drawn in spreadsheets, a future that now seemed laughably naive. My wife, bless her steady heart, often noticed the subtle tension in my shoulders, the way my jaw would clench as I reviewed our monthly budget, the silent calculations running through my mind as I tried to balance everything. Our children's needs, the braces, the school trips, the ever-present tuition savings account that felt perpetually underfunded, our own modest aspirations, and the growing pressure of supporting aging parents who were now relying on us more than ever, firmly placing us in the sandwich generation bind. Her parents were facing their own health challenges, requiring specialized care that insurance barely covered, and my own mother, frail but fiercely independent, needed increasing help with her finances and daily errands. The weight of all these lives resting on my shoulders, on my perceived stability, was immense. I never spoke much about the hidden credit card debt that had accumulated from a series of minor emergencies. A sudden car repair that drained our emergency fund, an unexpected dental procedure for one of the children, and a few too many impulse purchases, small indulgences meant to alleviate the quiet despair, or the student loan debt that, even after all these years, remained a quiet burden impacting major life decisions, always there, a phantom weight on our collective future. The truth was, for all the outward appearance of success, the quiet comfort, the polite nods from colleagues, there was a growing hollowness inside me, a profound sense of moral compromise that came with the high-paying but soul-crushing job, the endless corporate jargon about synergy and optimizing deliverables, the feeling of being a replaceable cog in a vast, impersonal machine. I had once dreamed of being an artist, of working with my hands, of seeing the tangible results of my own creativity, of creating something beautiful and lasting. I remembered the smell of fresh oil paint, the way the light caught the texture of a canvas in my youth, a yearning so potent it physically ached. But that dream had been carefully filed away, labeled impractical and childish by the younger, ambitious me, swallowed by the demands of a career that promised stability and a path to wealth, a path I had dutifully followed, sacrificing passion on the altar of perceived responsibility. My days blurred into an endless cycle of meetings, abstract problem solving, and the dull glow of a screen, each line of code feeling less like creation and more like a concession. Then came the email, a bland, impersonal subject line about organizational restructuring, followed by a meeting request that felt colder than the morning air outside. The words from my boss were delivered with a practiced gravitas, devoid of genuine empathy, the standard corporate script about difficult decisions, market shifts, and streamlining operations. He sat across from me at the polished conference room table, his smile tight, his eyes avoiding mine, the sterile fluorescent lights humming above us, reflecting off the glass walls. I could almost smell the faint antiseptic scent of the cleaning products used on the pristine surfaces, a clean that felt utterly alien to the messy, complicated reality he was delivering. My mind reeled, a sudden, deafening silence where the hum of the servers used to be. Layoff. The word hung in the sterile conference room air, heavy and final like a dropped stone. 20 years gone in a blink, a career dissolved into a severance package, and a polite invitation to clear out my desk by the end of the day. My hands felt clammy, a knot tightening in my stomach as I walked out of that building for the last time, the automatic doors sliding shut behind me with a soft, final hiss, a sound that felt like an exhale of a life no longer mine. The weight of my laptop bag, usually a comforting presence, now felt like a heavy burden. The city noises seemed amplified, mocking my sudden aimlessness, the blare of a distant car horn, the chatter of pedestrians rushing past, all moving with a purpose I no longer possessed. I drove home on autopilot, the familiar route feeling alien, the steering wheel slick under my palms, my mind replaying the boss's carefully chosen, hollow phrases. My wife's face when I told her was a mirror of my own shock, then a wave of concern that slowly bled into quiet fear. She was at the kitchen island, chopping vegetables for dinner, the rhythmic thud of the knife against the cutting board suddenly halting. Her hand found mine across the cool granite, a silent anchor in the sudden storm. The immediate emotional toll was immense, a cascade of fear, anger, and a bewildering sense of unworthiness. How could this happen? What would we do? The severance felt like a temporary band-aid, a ticking clock against the backdrop of our substantial mortgage, the looming property taxes, and the ever-present threat of interest rates climbing even higher, trapping us further in our house-poor reality. That night, sleep was a distant luxury. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the shadows of the tree outside dancing faintly, morphing into imagined bills and eviction notices. My wife eventually stirred, reaching for my hand in the dark, her silent presence a fragile comfort. The first few weeks were a blur of restless nights and days spent staring at job boards, each rejection email a fresh stab, a little death by 1,000 automated cuts. I updated my resume, meticulously polishing every bullet point, trying to phrase my 2 decades of experience in a way that sounded exciting and relevant, not obsolete. I rewrote my LinkedIn profile countless times, spoke to recruiters who offered platitudes and little else, but the tech landscape felt different, colder, less welcoming to someone my age. The whispers about digital natives and culture fit felt like veiled accusations of my irrelevance. The once familiar office environment of my home study, where I'd spent countless hours coding, now felt like a prison, the walls closing in, the air stale with my own inaction. The constant anxiety over soaring inflation made every grocery bill, every utility statement, feel like a personal attack, a relentless erosion of our dwindling financial security. I'd walk through the supermarket, my eyes scanning the prices, doing mental arithmetic, comparing unit costs, trying to stretch our dwindling savings further. The familiar comfort of our home began to feel like a financial burden, the spacious rooms mocking our growing emptiness. The marital strain began to show, quiet at first in unspoken fears, in the way we'd avoid eye contact when discussing finances, then in hushed, tense conversations after the children were asleep, the words laced with a brittle worry. I hated the feeling of being a financial burden, the crushing weight of responsibility, the shame of not providing, a primal instinct deeply ingrained in me. My wife's quiet support was there always, a gentle presence, but I could see the worry lines around her eyes, etched deeper with each passing day, the subtle clenching of her jaw, a mirror of my own internal battle. She'd bring me a cup of tea, leave a plate of food, but the silence between us often spoke volumes. I considered desperate measures, looking again at high-risk investments, the kind that promised quick returns but demanded even quicker decisions, remembering the sting of that past cryptocurrency failure, the sickening lurch in my stomach as my investment evaporated. The thought of losing what little we had left, of gambling away our family's last shred of security, was too terrifying, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. I clung to a sliver of my severance, a small buffer against total collapse, a last resort against the abyss. It was the only thing standing between us and the very real possibility of bankruptcy, a word that echoed in my mind with frightening clarity. It was during one particularly bleak afternoon, the rain drumming a monotonous rhythm against the windowpane, a gray, endless drizzle that matched my mood, that my gaze fell upon the dusty easel tucked away in the corner of my old study, now repurposed as a makeshift home office. The afternoon light, weak and diffused, somehow caught the faded canvas cover, making it almost glow. It had been a gift from my wife years ago, a gentle nudge to pursue a forgotten passion, a quiet acknowledgement of the artist I once was, before the corporate machine consumed me. The canvases, still in their plastic wrappers, seemed to call to me, a silent whisper from a life I'd abandoned, a faint scent of possibility clinging to their untouched surfaces. The idea, when it first surfaced, was absurd, laughable, turned to art, now. With no income, a family to support, and the specter of bankruptcy looming over us, the inner voice of practicality, honed by 2 decades in tech, screamed in protest, listing all the logical reasons why it was a foolish, irresponsible notion. But the seed was planted, a tiny flicker of hope against the encroaching darkness, a stubborn spark refusing to be extinguished. It was a risky career pivot, the kind of move that sensible people in midlife avoided, a leap of faith into an abyss of uncertainty. Yet, the thought of returning to the soulless grind of corporate code, even if an opportunity arose, filled me with a deeper dread than the uncertainty of the canvas. The moral compromises I had made, the erosion of my own spirit in that high-paying but soul-crushing job, the feeling of my soul withering under the weight of endless meetings and meaningless metrics, now felt unbearable. This was not just about finding a new source of income. It was about reclaiming something I had lost, a piece of myself that had been stifled under layers of corporate responsibility and financial ambition, a yearning for authenticity that had been buried alive. The decision, though terrifying, felt like coming home, a quiet, almost desperate promise to myself. I started small, hesitant at first, like a child learning to walk again, each stroke tentative, uncertain. I cleaned the dust from the easel, wiping away years of neglect, setting up a small space in the spare room. The scent of turpentine and fresh paint, sharp and invigorating, was a welcome change from the sterile smell of my old office, a breath of fresh air after years of stale corporate air conditioning. I used a small portion of my dwindling savings to buy basic paints, brushes, and a few canvases, telling myself it was a form of therapy, a way to process the emotional toll of the layoff, a justification for what felt like an indulgence. The bristles of the new brushes felt unfamiliar in my fingers, so accustomed to the smooth keys of a keyboard. There were days of frustration, of discarded canvases crumpled in a heap, of colors that wouldn't blend, forms that wouldn't coalesce, each failure a fresh blow to my already fragile self-esteem. I'd curse under my breath, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and despair, the paint smearing under my frustrated touch. But there were also moments of pure, unadulterated joy, a sudden burst of color mixing just right, a line that flowed spontaneously and perfectly, a reflection of light that captured the exact feeling I was trying to convey, a small triumph that sent a thrill through me. These were small victories, tiny sparks in the vast emptiness of unemployment, moments that reminded me of the profound satisfaction of tangible creation. I began to spend more time painting, losing myself in the tactile experience, the rich textures, the way light played on the surface of the paint, the smell of linseed oil filling the small room. The outside world, with its financial anxieties and mounting pressures, would fade, if only for a few precious hours, replaced by the immediate, absorbing challenge of the canvas. My mind, once cluttered with lines of code and market predictions, was now singularly focused on the interplay of hues and shadows. I'd emerge from the makeshift studio hours later, exhausted but strangely invigorated, my fingers stained with paint, a faint ache in my shoulder, a sense of quiet accomplishment blooming within me. My friends, most of whom still inhabited the comfortable world of high-paying tech jobs, were, to put it mildly, perplexed. At first, there was the expected outpouring of sympathy, the offers to network, the polite suggestions to retool for the next big thing for a growth sector. They'd send me links to online courses, to articles about the latest in AI and machine learning, always with the underlying assumption that I would, of course, claw my way back into the familiar corporate fold. But as weeks turned into months, and I continued to spend my days messing around with paint instead of furiously applying for coding jobs, their understanding began to wane, replaced by a subtle, then not-so-subtle judgment. "So when are you going to get a real job?" one friend asked, his tone laced with a thinly veiled judgment during a casual coffee shop meeting near my old building. He wore a crisp, expensive shirt, and the scent of his high-end cologne filled the air around our small table, a stark contrast to my worn jeans and paint-stained fingernails. The coffee, once a daily ritual, now felt like an expensive luxury, each sip accompanied by a mental calculation of its cost. He leaned forward conspiratorially. "You know, there's a new startup looking for senior architects, a real opportunity to get in on the ground floor, build some equity." I could almost feel his pity, his inability to grasp that a real job might be the very thing I was trying to escape. Another, an old colleague who had always been keenly aware of our respective incomes and investments, would ask pointedly about my income diversification strategies and whether I was seeing any return on investment from my artistic endeavors, his eyes scanning my face for signs of financial distress, a hint of desperation. He even suggested I should look into converting some remaining assets into cryptocurrencies if I was serious about rebuilding my portfolio, a suggestion that sent a shiver down my spine, reminding me of that earlier painful lesson in risk. The professional jealousy and financial comparison that had always quietly simmered beneath the surface of our friendships now boiled over into open questioning, a subtle dismissal of my new path. They couldn't understand why I wasn't desperate to claw my way back into the corporate world, why I wasn't chasing the next big startup, why I was choosing uncertainty and perceived poverty over the security they held so dear. Their well-meaning advice often felt like a subtle betrayal, a judgment of my choices, a reaffirmation of their own values. They talked about passive income streams, about the latest market opportunities, about their own soaring stock portfolios, while I struggled to make sense of brushstrokes and color theory, all while anxiously calculating how many more weeks our remaining savings could cover the grocery bills and the ever-present tuition costs. The gulf between us widened, a chasm of unspoken expectations and diverging values. I realized our bond had been built more on shared professional status and financial comfort than on genuine understanding of each other's inner lives. The quiet anxiety of being house poor was now compounded by the social isolation, the feeling of being misunderstood, of having stepped off the conveyor belt of conventional success, a profound sense of loneliness setting in. The marital strain intensified as well, not from lack of love, but from the relentless financial pressure, a slow, grinding erosion of our shared peace. There were nights my wife and I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, the silence heavier than words, punctuated only by the distant hum of the refrigerator or the soft creak of the old house. Moonlight would filter through the blinds, casting stripes of silver across the cool sheets, illuminating our quiet despair. We argued about the credit card bills that were starting to creep up again, the balance growing like a malignant tumor, about the rising cost of school supplies for the children, about the medical debt that had accumulated after my mother's unexpected illness. A sudden hospitalization, then weeks of rehabilitation, an added burden on our already strained budget, a stark reminder of the sandwich generation reality that felt like a vice tightening around us. Every doctor's visit, every pharmacy receipt felt like a punch to the gut. I remember one particular evening, the air thick with unspoken worries, when a letter from the mortgage company arrived, its stark white envelope a beacon of dread. It detailed an alarming increase in our monthly payment due to the rising interest rates, a jump that felt impossible to absorb. The paper felt like a lead weight in my hand, the numbers on the page blurring through my tired eyes. My wife's quiet tears, not of anger but of sheer exhaustion, of accumulated fear and worry, broke something inside me. She wasn't yelling, she was just silently weeping into her hands at the kitchen table, the half-eaten dinner growing cold. It was a low point, a moment where the weight of it all felt truly crushing, where the facade I tried to maintain finally crumbled. I felt like a colossal failure, a burden utterly inadequate. The thought of bankruptcy, once a distant, abstract concept, now felt terrifyingly close, a real and present danger looming over our family. But even in those darkest moments, her strength, her quiet belief in me was a lifeline. She didn't always understand the art, didn't always see the nascent beauty in my floundering attempts, but she understood my need for it, my need to create, to find meaning beyond the spreadsheets and the corporate ladder, beyond the cold, hard numbers. She would bring me a cup of tea, warm my hands with hers, and simply say, "We'll figure it out, just keep going," her voice a soft, unwavering comfort. Those small moments of support, the shared glance across the kitchen table, the way she'd gently encourage me after a particularly bad painting day, the quiet appreciation for a small, imperfect sketch became my quiet joys, my anchors in the storm, reminding me that I was not alone. It solidified a truth deeper than any financial equation. that our bond, our family, was the true investment, the only one that truly mattered. I started taking my small, imperfect canvases to local craft fairs, setting up a wobbly table laden with my tentative creations, my heart pounding with a mix of hope and humiliation. The air often smelled of damp earth and fried dough from nearby food trucks. The rejections were frequent, the sales sparse, each indifferent glance from a passerby a small sting. One cold Saturday, after hours of standing in the wind, my fingers numb with cold, contemplating packing up early, a single elderly woman paused. She had kind eyes, framed by delicate wrinkles. She looked at a small landscape I'd painted of a local park, capturing the way the early morning sun caught the leaves of a particular oak tree. She pointed to it, her finger tracing the outline of a branch. "The light," she murmured. "You've captured the light perfectly. It reminds me of my childhood." She purchased it for a modest sum, carefully counting out the bills from a worn purse. Her genuine smile, her kind words about the light and color, meant more than any corporate bonus I had ever received. It was a tiny spark, a validation, a moment of profound connection. It wasn't about the money, not really, though we desperately needed it. It was about connection, about someone seeing something in my work, in me, that resonated, that evoked a memory. That night, the empty cups on the table in our kitchen seemed to gleam a little brighter, a subtle warmth permeating the room. I started to rethink my approach to everything. I couldn't afford formal art classes, the tuition a luxury we simply couldn't justify, but I found free online tutorials, devoured art books from the library, practicing for hours, sometimes until my fingers ached and my eyes blurred. I learned about different techniques, chiaroscuro, impasto, glazing, about marketing my art, about building a small online presence. I taught myself how to photograph my paintings, to edit the images, to navigate online marketplaces. I began to understand that financial stability in this new world wouldn't come from a single large income, but from a mosaic of small streams, from consistent effort, from truly understanding my craft and its value, from building a resilient, diversified income strategy rooted in my own labor. This was my new risk management strategy, not in speculative stocks or volatile crypto, but in honest, creative labor, in the steady application of skill and passion. I began to develop a style, a voice in my art, focusing on the quiet beauty of everyday scenes, the way the morning light filtered through the kitchen window, casting long, peaceful shadows, the texture of an old wooden fence weathered by years of sun and rain, the worn fabric of a favorite armchair by the fireplace, its contours softened by countless hours of quiet contemplation. These were the things that truly moved me, the micro-specifics of life that had always been there, unnoticed during my previous code-filled existence, lost in the noise of corporate demands. My children would sometimes sit beside me, watching with wide, curious eyes, their innocent wonder a powerful antidote to my lingering self-doubt. Their unadulterated joy in a splash of bright yellow, their simple observations, "That cloud looks like a dragon, Papa," reminded me of the pure, unburdened creativity I was trying to rediscover, pulling me out of my own head and into the present moment. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to shift. The online sales started to pick up, small but steady, a trickle that grew into a dependable stream. I received a commission for a portrait of a beloved pet, then another for a landscape of a cherished family home. Each successful sale, each positive review was a small injection of confidence, a reaffirmation that I was on the right path. The credit card debt, which had been a constant source of quiet dread, slowly started to shrink, the numbers on the monthly statement finally moving in the right direction. The mortgage payment still felt heavy, a constant reminder of our largest financial commitment, but no longer suffocating, no longer a weight that threatened to crush us. I revisited our budget with a new, sober perspective, ruthlessly cutting unnecessary expenses, canceling streaming subscriptions, choosing cheaper brands at the supermarket, mending clothes rather than buying new ones, making conscious decisions about every penny, a new kind of discipline born from necessity, not deprivation. The anxiety didn't vanish entirely. It became a dull ache rather than a sharp pain, a reminder of where I had been, a scar of past struggles. The old friends, the ones who didn't understand, drifted further away. The phone calls became less frequent, the invitations stopped arriving. There was one final, awkward encounter at a mutual acquaintance's barbecue, where a former colleague made a thinly veiled comment about early retirement and finding oneself, a dismissive chuckle accompanying his words. I just smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. It was a gently bittersweet loss, but one I had come to accept. Their world, with its relentless focus on wealth and external validation, its metrics of success measured in stock options and market share, was no longer mine. My new community, forged in the shared passion for art, in dusty studios and lively online forums, felt more authentic, more real. I had found kindred spirits, people who understood the struggle and the joy of creation, whose eyes lit up at the discussion of color theory, not profit margins. I hadn't regained the wealth and corporate success of my former life, not in monetary terms. The overflowing bank accounts were a thing of the past, but I had gained something far more precious: a sense of purpose, a quiet contentment, a profound connection to myself and my family, and to the tangible world around me. The days were still long, often challenging, filled with the demands of creation and the realities of a small business, but they were filled with meaning, with a sense of honest labor and genuine fulfillment. The chill of the morning air no longer felt like a harbinger of dread, but simply the crisp beginning of a new day, a fresh canvas waiting to be filled. I'd still make my coffee, trace the cool granite, the comforting routine a constant, but now my gaze would linger on the subtle shifts of light outside, on the intricate patterns of shadows on the wall, on the vibrant hues of the sunrise, seeing the world with an artist's eye, no longer trapped behind a screen, but truly seeing, truly living. The journey from code to canvas had been arduous, marked by unspoken fears, by loss, by the sting of professional jealousy, and by the constant struggle against financial precarity. But it had led me home, not to a place, but to myself, content with what I had, finally at peace with the man I had become, brush in hand, a quiet creator in a world that once only valued code. What's a moment in your life where you truly had to reevaluate your values, and what did you learn from it? Share your story in the comments below, like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe to Credit and Coffee for more deep dives into life's financial and personal journeys. Also, tell me, what's one small joy you experienced this week that brought a smile to your face?